Three women stood up in a courtroom. One was a lawyer. One was a nurse. One was holding a baby. They were all white. The man sitting at the defense table was black, 76 years old, wearing a suit he'd owned for 28 years. Hands folded, eyes red. He was their father. Not by blood, not by law, by choice. The eldest looked at the judge and said,
"Your Honor, this man raised us. He worked 3 jobs. He slept on a couch for 6 years so we could have his bed. And today, we're asking this court to let us carry his name."
The old man's shoulders began to shake. But to understand why, you have to go back 28 years, to a rainy night, an open door, and a promise that changed everything. I'm not gonna lie, that hit me a little. Let's get into the story. But Gerald Jefferson's life wasn't built for miracles. It was built for surviving until morning. Gerald grew up in the foster care system in Ohio, 6 homes before he turned 14. Most of them he doesn't talk about. One family was kind, the Dawsons. They let him stay for 2 years. They read to him at night. Their son, Clyde, was a few years older. He used to share his lunch with Gerald at school. But even the Dawsons couldn't keep him forever. Gerald aged out of the system at 18. No ceremony, no goodbye party. Just a duffel bag, a GED, and a bus ticket to Columbus. No family waiting, no savings account, no safety net. Just a kid standing at a bus stop with everything he owned in one hand. By 1993, Gerald was 48 years old. He lived alone in a second-floor apartment on the east side of town. Small place, 1 bedroom, a radiator that clanked all night like somebody knocking to get in. The wallpaper in the hallway was peeling. The faucet dripped if you didn't turn it just right. But the kitchen was spotless. And in the middle of that kitchen sat a yellow Formica table with 4 mismatched chairs. He'd bought it at a church sale for $8. He didn't know why he bought 4 chairs. He lived alone. Nobody ever came over for dinner. But he kept all 4 chairs pulled out, like he was waiting for somebody. Gerald worked 3 jobs. Job number 1, school janitor at Ridgemont Elementary. 5:30 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. He mopped hallways, scrubbed bathrooms, fixed things that weren't his responsibility. A little girl's glasses, taped back together with electrical tape. A boy's torn backpack, stitched during lunch with a needle he kept in his pocket. And every time a child talked to him, Gerald did something most adults don't do. He knelt down, got on one knee so he was at their eye level, never looked down at them, never made them feel small. The kids loved him for it. The teachers smiled at him in the hallway. But nobody in that building knew his last name. Job number 2, grocery stocker at Fresh Mart. 3 in the afternoon to 8 at night, loading shelves, stacking cans. His back ached so bad some nights he had to lean against the wall in the break room just to breathe. His hands were cracked from cleaning chemicals, deep lines that never fully healed. The manager talked to him like he was part of the furniture. Gerald never complained. He hummed gospel songs under his breath while he worked. And every shift, he quietly set aside the dented cans, the ones they'd throw away, and put them in a box for the food bank down the street. He never told anyone. Job number 3, overnight cleaning at a commercial office building. 10 at night to 2 in the morning. Vacuuming carpets, emptying trash cans, wiping desks. The offices had framed degrees on the walls. Law degrees, business degrees. Gerald would read the spines of the books on the shelves while he dusted. He wasn't jealous. He was curious. He read everything he could get his hands on. Magazines left on desks, newspapers in the recycling bin, once even a chapter of a textbook someone left open. In his back pocket, Gerald carried a worn leather wallet. Brown, soft from years of use. And inside? Nothing. No photos. No emergency contacts. Just his ID and a few folded bills. A wallet with room for a whole life, but nothing to fill it with. He had a saying he told himself on the bad nights. The nights when the radiator clanked and the apartment felt too quiet and his body hurt in places he couldn't name. If nobody's coming to save you, You become the person who saves somebody else. The only person at Ridgemont Elementary who really knew Gerald, really knew him, was Maggie Barnes. 65 years old, white, widowed. She worked the front desk. She was the only person who asked Gerald how he was doing and then actually waited for the answer. Every Tuesday she brought him coffee. Not from the teacher's lounge, from the good place down the street. They ate lunch together on a bench behind the school. She knew about all 3 jobs. She knew he slept 4 hours a night. She knew his shoes had holes he covered with duct tape. One Tuesday she looked at him and said, "You're going to work yourself into a grave, Gerald." He smiled. "At least I'll be useful on the way down." That was Gerald Jefferson, a man the world walked past every single day without seeing. But what the world didn't know, what nobody could have known, was that Gerald's life was about to change. Not because of luck, not because of money, but because of a door. One night in November, Gerald was walking home from his overnight shift. 2:15 in the morning, rain coming down steady, cold rain, the kind that soaks through your jacket in seconds. He passed a house on Maple Street, a house he'd walked past 1,000 times. But tonight, something was different. The front door was wide open. In the rain, the kitchen light was on, and from somewhere inside, Gerald heard a child crying. Not screaming, not throwing a tantrum, a tired, hopeless kind of crying. The kind that means nobody has come for a very long time. Gerald stopped. He stood in the rain, looking at that open door, and then he stepped forward. What Gerald didn't know was that the woman inside that house had exactly 11 days left to live. He knocked on the open door. No answer. He called out, "Hello? Ma'am? Is everything all right in there?" Nothing. Just the crying. Gerald stepped inside. The house was dim. Dishes were piled in the sink, not from carelessness, from exhaustion. A stack of unopened mail sat on the counter. Some of the envelopes were turning yellow. A bag of groceries sat by the front door, still sealed, soaked through from the rain. Someone had dropped them off, but nobody had been strong enough to carry them to the kitchen. And on the sofa in the living room, wrapped in a thin blanket, was a woman. Loretta Brennan, white, mid-30s. Her eyes were open but barely focused. She was awake, but she couldn't stand. She couldn't call out. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, breathing in slow, shallow pulls. She had advanced cancer. She'd known for months. She hadn't told anyone. Her husband, Harold, had left over a year ago. No phone call, no money, no forwarding address. Just a man who walked out one morning and never came back. Loretta had no siblings, no living parents, no one in the state who shared her blood. She had been holding it together alone for months, feeding the girls, bathing them, getting Catherine to preschool. But her body was giving out. She hadn't been able to cook in 3 days. She could barely make it from the sofa to the bathroom. And her daughters were trying to survive without her. Catherine, 4 years old, standing in the kitchen on her tiptoes, reaching for a can of formula on the top shelf. Her little fingers stretched as far as they could go. She couldn't reach it. She'd been trying for a while. You could tell because a chair had been pushed to the counter. She'd already tried standing on it. It wasn't tall enough. 4 years old. And she was trying to feed her baby sister, Ellie, 2 years old, sitting on the floor near the sofa, clutching a blanket, her eyes red and swollen. She wasn't crying anymore. She had been, for a long time, but she'd run out. And in the next room, in a crib, Sophie, 8 months old, awake, eyes wide open, silent, not sleeping, not fussing, just lying there, still. She had stopped crying, not because she was okay, because she had learned that crying didn't bring anyone. This wasn't violence. There was no broken glass, no shouting, no bruises. This was something quieter and worse. A family sinking, slowly, silently, in a house with the door wide open, on a street where people walked past every single day. Gerald didn't hesitate. He picked up Catherine first. She was shaking. He carried her to the sofa, set her down next to her mother, and wrapped a dry blanket around her shoulders. Then he lifted Ellie onto his hip. She buried her face in his neck and didn't move. He walked to the kitchen, found the formula, warmed a bottle with one hand while holding Ellie with the other. Then he went to Sophie's crib, lifted her out carefully, fed her. She latched onto the bottle and grabbed his finger. She didn't let go. Gerald called 911. The ambulance came. They took Loretta to the hospital. A neighbor peeked through the window. Someone from down the street stood on the porch for a second, then left. Nobody offered to take the girls. Gerald stayed. Nobody asked him to. He just did. The next day, at the hospital, Loretta opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was a stranger. A black man sitting in a plastic chair next to her bed. Catherine was asleep against his shoulder. Ellie was in his lap, holding his finger, the same way Sophie had. And Sophie was calm in a baby carrier Gerald had found in Loretta's closet. For 1 second, Loretta looked confused. Then she looked at her daughters, all 3 of them, safe, clean, fed, resting. And the confusion melted into something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Relief. Not because she knew this man, she didn't, but because she could see what he was. "I don't have long," Loretta whispered. Her voice was thin, fragile. "Maybe days, maybe 2 weeks." Gerald didn't say anything. "I have no one," she said. "If I go, they'll take my girls. They'll separate them. They'll put them in the system." Gerald sat very still. He didn't respond right away, because he knew exactly what she meant. He'd lived it. 6 homes, 14 years. He knew what the system did to children who had no one to fight for them. Loretta didn't ask him directly. Not yet, but her eyes did. And Gerald felt something pulling at his chest, a door he knew he shouldn't open, because everything behind it was harder than anything he'd ever done, more expensive than anything he could afford, more painful than any shift, any ache, any lonely night in that apartment. But the door was open, and he was already standing in front of it. The next morning, Gerald showed up at Loretta's house. He had 2 bags of groceries. He'd bought them with his last $40. He didn't mention the night before. He didn't talk about the hospital. He just walked into the kitchen and started making scrambled eggs. Catherine stood in the hallway, watching him. After a long time, she walked up to him. She looked up at his face. "Are you going to go away too?" Gerald stopped. He set the spatula down, and then he knelt. One knee on the kitchen floor, eye level with a 4-year-old girl. "Not today," he said. But saying not today was easy. What came next would cost Gerald Jefferson everything he had. And some things he didn't. For the next 11 days, Gerald showed up at Loretta's house every single day. Before his shifts, after his shifts, sometimes between them. He cooked, he cleaned, he washed bottles. He folded tiny clothes he didn't know the sizes of. He held Sophie at 3 in the morning when she wouldn't stop fussing, walking her back and forth in the hallway, humming the same gospel song until she finally went still against his chest. Loretta watched him from the couch. She was too weak to stand most days, but she watched everything. The way he moved around the kitchen, the way he spoke to Catherine, never rushed, never annoyed. The way he checked on Ellie before he checked on himself. She was studying him, like a woman trying to answer the most important question of her life. One evening, Loretta asked him, "Gerald, why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because somebody should." Loretta cried. Gerald didn't. Over those 11 days, Loretta asked him about his life. He told her. Foster care, 6 homes, the Dawsons, the one family that let him feel safe. Aging out at 18 with nothing, 3 jobs, an empty apartment, a table with 4 chairs and no one to sit in them. He told her all of it, not for sympathy, just because she asked, and nobody ever asked. On the 9th day, Loretta called Gerald into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table. A piece of paper lay in front of her. Her hands were shaking. "Sit down," she said. "Please." Gerald sat. Loretta slid the paper across the table. It was a guardianship form, legal, official, already partially filled out. "I have no right to ask you this," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. But I've watched you for 9 days, Gerald, and I've seen more fathering in your hands than Harold showed in 4 years." Gerald stared at the paper. He didn't respond, not right away. Instead, he started doing the math, out loud. Not for Loretta, for himself, trying to talk himself out of it. 3 children, he said quietly. I make $11.25 an hour, across 3 jobs. I got a 1-bedroom apartment, no car, $82 in savings. He paused. I'm 48 years old. Every number said no. Every calculation said walk away. Every rational thought in his head told him this was impossible. Then he looked up. Catherine was standing in the doorway. She was holding Ellie's hand, and Sophie was on her hip. A 4-year-old girl, carrying her 8-month-old sister, balancing her on one side like she'd been doing it her whole life. Her little arm wrapped tight around the baby, her other hand gripping her 2-year-old sister's fingers. 4 years old, and already a parent. Gerald's chest broke open. Not from sadness, from recognition. He knew that child. He had been that child. Carrying weight no kid should ever carry. Trying to hold everything together because nobody else was going to do it. And for him, nobody came. Gerald picked up the pen. His hand was trembling. He signed the form. Loretta grabbed his hand, held it tight. "Promise me something," she said. He nodded. "Promise me they'll know they were loved. Not by me. I won't be here for that." Her voice cracked. "By you." Gerald looked at her, and he whispered, "I promise." 2 days later, Loretta Brennan passed away in hospice. Gerald was there, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. The girls were with Maggie Barnes. Gerald had asked her that morning, "Can you take them today? Just for a few hours?" Maggie didn't ask why. She just said yes. When the monitors went flat, Gerald didn't move. He sat in that room for 20 minutes, alone, holding a hand that couldn't hold him back. Then he stood up, walked to the bathroom, washed his face, looked at himself in the mirror, and drove to Maggie's house to pick up his daughters. His daughters. That's what they were now. The CPS caseworker who processed the guardianship was a woman named Nancy Tillman. 15 years on the job. She'd seen every kind of case. Good ones, bad ones, ones that kept her up at night. This one made her pause. A single black man. No biological connection to the children. 3 jobs. 1-bedroom apartment. 48 years old. She filed the paperwork. But she looked Gerald in the eye and said, "I'll be checking on them. Often." Gerald nodded. "Good. Come on Tuesdays. That's when I make spaghetti." Nancy didn't smile. Not yet. But she wrote something in her notes that she wouldn't show him until years later. Gerald took his daughters home. He gave them his bedroom, set up a second-hand crib for Sophie, a bunk bed from a church sale for Catherine and Ellie, a nightlight shaped like a star that he found at a garage sale for 50 cents, and Gerald slept on the couch. For the next 6 years. Every night, after his last shift, he'd come home, check on each girl, Sophie first, then Ellie, then Catherine, and then lie down on that couch. His feet hung off the end. His back screamed by morning. But he never once complained. And he never once took that bedroom back. The yellow kitchen table became the center of everything. Breakfast, lunchboxes, homework, arguments, bedtime stories. Gerald read to them every night from library books, did a different voice for every character. Catherine's favorite was the dragon. Ellie liked the princess. Sophie just liked the sound of his voice. And one night, after the girls were asleep, Gerald sat at the table alone. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. He opened it. For the first time in 48 years, he put something inside. A photo. Small, slightly blurry. 3 baby girls, Catherine, Ellie, and Sophie. Taken at the hospital the day Loretta was admitted. He slid it into the plastic sleeve, pressed the wallet shut, put it back in his pocket. The wallet wasn't empty anymore. and neither was Gerald. Okay, wait, hold on. $82. This man had $82 and a couch. And he said yes to 3 kids. 3 kids that weren't his. Bro, I would have been doing math on a napkin for 6 months. He just picked up the pen. That's insane. That's real love. No cap. For a while, Gerald made it work. 3 jobs, 3 girls, 2 hours of sleep, 1 couch. But the thing about building a life on nothing is, it only takes 1 crack to bring the whole thing down. The years moved forward, and Gerald's routine became something the neighborhood could set a clock to. Up at 4:15. Pack 3 lunches, peanut butter for Catherine, ham and cheese for Ellie, apple slices and crackers for Sophie because she was picky about everything. Walk them to school. Rain, snow, 98 degrees in August. Didn't matter. Gerald walked them every single morning. Then the janitor shift. Then pick them up. Then the grocery shift. Then homework at the yellow table. Then bedtime stories. Gerald read library books every night and did a different voice for every character. Catherine always wanted the dragon voice. Ellie liked the princess. Sophie just wanted him to keep talking. Then the overnight shift. Then home. Then the couch. 2 hours of sleep. Then the alarm. Then again. There were moments, though. Small ones. The kind that don't show up in anybody's records, but stay inside your chest forever. Catherine brought home her first A on a spelling test. Gerald taped it to the refrigerator. It stayed there for 3 years. The tape yellowed. The paper curled at the edges. He never took it down. Ellie had a school play. 3rd grade. She played a tree. Gerald sat in the front row in his janitor uniform, the same one he'd been wearing all day. He clapped louder than every parent in that auditorium. Ellie told him later she could hear him from the stage. Sophie said her first word at 13 months. She looked at Gerald across the yellow table, pointed, and said, "Dada." Gerald froze. Maggie was there that day. She saw his face and started crying before he did. And then there was this. 10 o'clock at night. The grocery shift just ended. Gerald sitting at the yellow table with Catherine, teaching her multiplication. He didn't know the material. He'd never learned it in school. But the night before, at his overnight cleaning job, he found a 4th grade math textbook someone had left on a desk. He read the whole chapter while he vacuumed, took notes on a napkin. And now here he was, teaching it like he'd known it his whole life. Catherine never found out. People tried to help. Pastor Clyde Dawson, the son of the family that had once fostered Gerald, came by one afternoon. He offered money from the church benevolence fund. Gerald shook his head. "Give it to somebody who needs it, Clyde." "Gerald, you need it." "No." Gerald's voice was calm but firm. "I need them to see me handle it. That's what they need to see." A teacher at the school offered to set up a GoFundMe page. Gerald said no again. "I appreciate it, I do, but those girls don't need charity. They need consistency." He never took a dollar he didn't earn. One Tuesday, Nancy Tillman came for a home visit. She walked through the apartment. The girls were doing homework at the yellow table. The apartment was spotless. Dinner was on the stove. Nancy stood at the door for a moment. Then she said something she had never said in 15 years of casework. "Exceptional home environment. Recommend continued placement." She paused, looked at Gerald. "Mr. Jefferson, if you ever need anything at all, you call me." She handed him her card. Gerald put it in his wallet, right behind the photo. Not everyone was kind, though. A parent at the school pulled Catherine aside one afternoon. "Is that man really your father?" Catherine was 8. She didn't hesitate. "He's my dad." The parent frowned. At the grocery store, a customer saw the photo in Gerald's wallet, 3 white girls, and said, "Those your kids?" "Yes, ma'am," Gerald said. The customer's face did something complicated. Gerald just smiled and bagged her groceries. He never talked about it. Not to Maggie, not to Clyde, not to the girls. But some nights, after they were asleep, He sat alone at the yellow table and stared at the wall for a very long time. The girls were growing. Gerald was aging, faster than he should have. His back was getting worse. His hands shook when he held a coffee cup. He had a limp he hid when he walked them to school, shifted his weight just right so they wouldn't notice. But every morning, he knelt down to tie Sophie's shoes. One knee on the ground, eye level. And she'd say, "Morning, Daddy." And the pain in his spine would disappear for exactly as long as it took to tie a double knot. Gerald thought the hardest part was behind him. 28 years, 3 jobs, 3 daughters were raised. All of them are thriving. Catherine was 32. A criminal defense attorney. She chose that career because she grew up watching her father get overlooked by systems that should have protected him. Ellie was 29, a nurse. Sophie was 26, a teacher who used the same kind of pencils Gerald once worked a double shift to buy her. Gerald was 76, still mopping floors at Ridgemont Elementary. His limp was harder to hide. His cough came more often. Maggie kept telling him to retire. He shook his head. Those kids still need somebody to fix their glasses. But what Gerald didn't know was that his life was about to be torn apart. Not by age, by a lie. Ridgemont had a new vice principal. Gregory Ashford, mid-40s, polished, cold. He never called Gerald by name, just the custodian. He once told a new teacher, "Don't get too friendly with the cleaning staff." The school ran an annual charity fund for low-income students, backpacks, supplies, winter coats. This year, about $15,000. One Monday morning, the money was gone. Security footage showed Gerald entering the administrative office the night before. Of course it did. He cleaned that office every night, 28 years. But Ashford only showed one clip. Gerald walking in at 10:42. No context, no cleaning, no exit. "He was in the room," Ashford told the police, "and the money's gone." They arrested Gerald at the school. A Tuesday morning, in front of students, in front of teachers who had known him for decades, handcuffs on, walks down the hallway he had mopped every single morning for 28 years. He didn't resist, didn't shout, just walked, head down. That night, Gerald sat in a holding cell, no money for bail. His public defender barely looked at him. The local news ran a headline, "School janitor arrested for stealing from children's fund." He stared at the phone on the wall. He thought about calling his daughters. They would come. He knew that. But he didn't want them to see him like this. So he dialed the only other number he had memorized. A number from a card he'd kept in his wallet for over 20 years. Right behind the photo. Nancy Tillman picked up on the second ring. "Nancy," he said, "it's Gerald Jefferson. I think I need that favor now." But what Gerald didn't know was that his daughters had already seen the news, and they were already on their way. But here's what nobody in that courtroom expected. Not the judge, not the prosecutor, and definitely not Gerald Jefferson. 3 weeks after the arrest, the trial began. Nancy Tillman had helped with bail. She made calls, pulled strings, got Gerald out of that holding cell within 48 hours. But the charge remained. Theft. $15,000 from a children's charity fund. Gerald arrived at the courthouse early, 6:30 in the morning. The doors weren't even open yet. He stood outside in his suit, the same suit from 28 years ago. Maggie had re-stitched the shoulder seam the night before, ironed it twice. He walked in, sat at the defense table, folded his hands. Same posture, same man, same suit. His public defender sat beside him, shuffling papers, barely making eye contact. The prosecution's case was simple, and on the surface, it was damning. Gerald Jefferson had access to the administrative office. He was seen on security footage entering the office at 10:42 on the night the money disappeared. The camera inside the office had malfunctioned that evening. No internal footage available. The money was transferred out of the account that same night. The prosecutor called Gregory Ashford to the stand. Ashford sat straight, calm, confident. He testified that Gerald had both access and opportunity. He walked the jury through the security clip. Gerald entering. Just entering. No context. No cleaning supplies. No exit. Then, Ashford said something that made Gerald's stomach drop. "Your Honor, this is a man who has worked 3 jobs his entire adult life. At some point, desperation leads to poor decisions." Gerald didn't move, but his jaw tightened. The public defender's cross-examination was weak. A few standard questions, nothing sharp, nothing that pushed back. Gerald watched the jury. He saw doubt on some faces, pity on others, and on a few, something worse. A look he had seen his entire life, the kind that says the verdict was written before the trial started. Gerald stared at the table. He thought about the hallway, the handcuffs, the headline. 28 years of showing up. And this is where it led. Then the courtroom doors opened. The sound came first. Heels on tile. Steady. Deliberate. Every step landing with purpose. Catherine Whitmore walked in. Blazer. Heels. A litigation bag over her shoulder. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at the jury. She walked straight to the defense table and set her bag down. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to enter an appearance as lead defense counsel for the defendant." Judge Evelyn Porter looked up from her bench. "And you are, counselor?" "Catherine Whitmore, bar number 62914, criminal defense attorney." She paused, looked at Gerald. His eyes were wide. His lip was trembling. "And I'm his daughter." The courtroom stirred. The prosecutor objected. Late appearance. Potential conflict of interest. Judge Porter raised her hand. "The defendant has a right to counsel of his choosing. Objection overruled. Proceed." Catherine sat beside Gerald. She put her hand on his arm and whispered, "I got you, Dad." She requested a brief recess. Granted. During the recess, Catherine opened her litigation bag. Files, subpoenas, bank records, full security footage. She had been preparing for weeks. She never told Gerald. She knew what he'd say. "Don't risk your career for me." So she didn't ask. Court resumed. Catherine stood. "The defense calls Gregory Ashford back to the stand." Ashford returned. Still composed, still confident. Catherine played the full security footage. Not the clip Ashford had provided, the complete recording. Gerald entering at 10:42, pushing a cleaning cart, mopping the floor, wiping down desks, emptying the trash can. Leaving at 12:14, 92 minutes of routine cleaning. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Then she asked one question. "Mr. Ashford, who had administrative access to the charity fund's bank account?" Ashford shifted in his seat. "Several staff members. Including you." "Well, yes, in my capacity as—" "Thank you." Catherine turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit the following into evidence." She presented bank records, subpoenaed from the school's financial institution, showing a wire transfer of $14,800 from the school's charity account to a personal savings account in Gregory Ashford's name, transferred at 11:18 that night from a computer in Ashford's office, using Ashford's login credentials. The courtroom went silent. Catherine turned back to Ashford. He was gripping the armrest of the witness chair. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "you stole from children. And when you needed someone to blame, you chose the man who spent 28 years serving them. You chose him because he was quiet, because he was old, because he mopped your floors, and because you thought no one would fight for him." She looked at the jury. "You were wrong." Ashford's composure cracked. He stammered. His attorney called for a sidebar, but the damage was done. The jury deliberated for less than 40 minutes. Not guilty. The courtroom exhaled. A few people in the gallery clapped. Gerald's public defender shook Catherine's hand. The prosecutor gathered his files and left without a word. But Gerald didn't celebrate. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He sat at the table, hands folded, staring at the wood grain. Because for 3 weeks, the world had treated him like a criminal. And a verdict doesn't give all of that back. Catherine sat beside him. She waited. Then Gerald started to stand. "Dad, Catherine said. "Sit down." He looked at her. "What? We're not done." Gerald looked confused. Catherine turned toward the gallery. Ellie was standing. Sophie was standing. Sophie's baby was pressed against her chest, and Sophie was already crying. Catherine turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, we have one more matter to bring before the court today." What happened next wasn't a legal proceeding. It was 28 years of love, finally given a voice. Catherine stood and addressed Judge Porter. "Your Honor, on behalf of myself, my sister Eleanor Whitmore, and my sister Sophie Whitmore, we would like to file a joint petition for adult adoption." The courtroom went still. "We are requesting that this court officially recognize Gerald Jefferson as our legal father, and that our names be changed to Catherine Jefferson, Eleanor Jefferson, and Sophie Jefferson." Silence. Then murmurs. Someone in the gallery whispered. A court reporter stopped typing. Judge Porter removed her glasses and looked at Gerald. Gerald turned to Catherine. His face was blank, not because he didn't feel anything, because he felt too much. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Catherine looked at him. "Something we should have done a long time ago." Judge Porter leaned forward. "Ms. Whitmore, the court will hear testimony in support of this petition. You may call your first witness." Catherine nodded. "The petitioners call Eleanor Whitmore." Ellie stood from the gallery. She walked to the witness stand. Her hands were shaking. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and took a breath. "I don't remember the night Gerald found us," she said. "I was 2 years old. I don't remember the rain. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember my mother's face from that night." She paused. "But I remember everything after. I remember him singing to Sophie at 3 a.m, walking her up and down the hallway, the same song, over and over, until she stopped crying. I remember sitting at the yellow table at 10 o'clock at night. Catherine was doing multiplication. She was stuck. And Gerald, Dad, sat beside her and taught her, step by step, patient, calm, like he'd known math his whole life." Ellie's voice wavered. "He didn't know math. I found out years later. He'd read the textbook the night before, at his overnight cleaning job, studied a chapter while he vacuumed offices, took notes on a napkin, so that the next evening he could sit at that table and teach his daughter like it was nothing." She wiped her eyes. "When I was 9, a kid at school told me, 'That's not your real dad.' I came home crying. I couldn't even get the words out. I just stood in the kitchen sobbing." And Gerald knelt down, one knee on the floor, eye level. He always did that. He never talked down to us. Never. He looked me right in the eye and said, Ellie's voice broke. He said, "Ellie, real isn't about where you come from. Real is about who shows up. And I'm showing up. Every day. That's my job." She looked at the judge. Steady now. "He showed up every single day for 28 years. Every single day. No days off. No complaints. No one making him do it. He just did." She turned to Gerald. "Today, we're showing up for you." Catherine stood again. "The petitioners call Sophie Whitmore." Sophie walked forward, baby Loretta on her hip. 2 years old, looking around the courtroom with wide eyes. Sophie sat at the witness stand and balanced her daughter on her lap. "Gerald Jefferson taught me to draw," Sophie said. "When I was 5, I told him I wanted to be an artist, a real artist. He didn't laugh. He didn't say maybe someday. He just nodded. When I was 9, Christmas morning, he gave me a box. Inside was a set of artist pencils. Real ones. Not crayons. Not the cheap kind from the dollar store. Professional pencils. 36 colors. I found out later he worked a double shift to buy them. 16 hours. Back to back. His hands were shaking when he handed me the box, and I didn't understand why until I was older." Sophie looked down at her daughter, then back up. "This man never raised his voice at us. Not once. And he had every reason to. 3 girls, no money, no sleep. A world that looked at him sideways every single day for loving children who didn't look like him." She lifted her baby slightly. "I named my daughter Loretta, After our birth mother. Because Dad taught us that the people who love us don't disappear. They just change shape. Her voice cracked. Our mother gave us life. Dad gave us everything else. And now we want to carry his name. Because it's the most important name we know. Catherine stood for the last time. She didn't give a legal argument. She gave a daughter's argument. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small, brown, worn soft from decades of use. Gerald's leather wallet. She held it up. Your Honor, this wallet has been in my father's pocket every single day for 28 years. She opened it. Inside, a photo. 3 baby faces. Faded, creased at the corners. Taken in 1993. When he started carrying this wallet, it was empty. No photos, no family, no one. Then one rainy night, he walked through an open door, and he filled it with us. She looked at the judge. He carried us to every shift, every parent-teacher conference, every time someone at the grocery store looked at him funny for holding a white child's hand. He carried us, and he never once put us down. She turned to Gerald. Dad, you gave us your name in every way that mattered, in every packed lunch, every bedtime story, every night you slept on that couch so we could have your bed. Today, we want to make it official. We want to be Jeffersons. Gerald didn't move. His hands were still folded on the table, the same position from the first moment we saw him. His chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders began to shake. 28 years, 3 jobs, a couch for a bed, never asking for anything, never complaining, never once saying, "Look what I did for you." And now 3 women were standing in a courtroom, asking a judge to let them carry his name. Gerald sobbed. Not quiet tears, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep you didn't know it was there. The kind that sounds like it's been locked inside a man's chest for decades, and someone finally found the key. Catherine put her arm around him. Ellie rushed from the witness stand. Sophie came forward, baby and all. The 4 of them held each other in the middle of a courtroom. Gerald's face was buried in Catherine's shoulder. His body shook. Judge Porter didn't bang her gavel. She just watched. Her own eyes were wet. The court reporter had stopped typing. Even the prosecutor looked away. After a long moment, Judge Porter spoke. In 22 years on this bench, I have seen thousands of cases. I have never witnessed anything like what I've seen today. She paused. The petition for adult adoption is granted, effective immediately. She looked at Gerald, and she smiled. Welcome to the Jefferson family, officially. Court is adjourned. In the hallway afterward, a woman approached Gerald. Councilwoman Patricia Owens. She'd been in the gallery. Pastor Clyde Dawson had told her about the case. Mr. Jefferson, she said, the city is launching a foster family support initiative. We need a founding advisor, someone who knows what these families go through, someone who's lived it. She handed him a card. Salaried position, benefits, an office, what you built alone, with nothing. We want to help other families build with support. Gerald looked at his 3 daughters. Catherine nodded. He took the card. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. It was just beginning to spread. Gregory Ashford was formally charged with embezzlement and filing a false police report. He was fired from Ridgemont Elementary, lost his license, lost his pension. The school board issued a public apology to Gerald, read aloud at a Tuesday morning assembly, in the same hallway where they had put handcuffs on him. The local news station that ran "School Janitor Arrested for Stealing from Children's Fund" ran a new headline the following week. Beloved Janitor Exonerated. Daughter's courtroom adoption goes viral. And it did go viral. A clip of Catherine's closing, the part where she held up the wallet and said, "He carried us, and he never once put us down," was shared on social media. 3 million views in the first week, 5 million by the end of the month. The comment sections filled up with strangers telling their own stories. Foster parents, adoptive families, stepfathers, grandmothers who raised grandchildren alone. People who had been loved by someone who had no obligation to love them. Gerald didn't understand social media. He didn't have a phone with apps. Sophie showed him the comments on hers one evening. He sat at the yellow table and read them, slowly, one by one, squinting at the screen. He didn't say anything. He just nodded and held the phone a little closer to his face. Gerald took the job with the city, founding advisor of the Foster Family Alliance of Ohio. His first initiative was something he called the Yellow Table Program. After-school tutoring, hot meals, a quiet place to do homework. For children in foster homes who didn't have a kitchen table with someone waiting for them. He named it after the only table that ever mattered to him. Within a year, 12 schools across Ohio had adopted the program. Over 500 foster children served in the first 12 months. Gerald visited every single location, shook every kid's hand, knelt down to talk to them at eye level. His daughters built on what he gave them. Catherine took on pro bono cases, defending people who had been falsely accused, people the system had failed. She won her first 3. Ellie opened a free health clinic for foster families, children who fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. She made sure they didn't fall anymore. Sophie started an art therapy program for kids in transitional housing. She used the same kind of artist pencils Gerald had once worked 16 hours to buy her. Every one of them chose a life of service, not because anyone told them to, because they watched a man do it every day for 28 years. At the Alliance's 1-year anniversary, Pastor Clyde Dawson gave a speech. He stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. "My parents fostered Gerald Jefferson when he was a boy," he said. "My mother used to say, 'You never know which seed is going to become the tree.'" He paused. "She planted one seed. Look at this forest." Gerald was in the front row. He cried. He didn't try to hide it this time. And here's what 28 years looked like, side by side. Before, a 1-bedroom apartment, a couch for a bed, 3 jobs, $82 in savings, an empty wallet. After, a home, 3 daughters with his name, a granddaughter named Loretta, a program that had already served hundreds of children, and a man who finally worked one job. Not because he didn't want to keep going, because his daughters sat him down at the yellow table and said, "Dad, it's our turn now." The governor's office invited Gerald to speak at a statewide education summit. Catherine offered to buy him a new suit. Gerald looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "This suit signed the guardianship papers," he said. "This suit sat in a holding cell. This suit stood in a courtroom while my daughters chose my name." He ran his hand along the re-stitched shoulder. This suit earned its place. But there's one more detail. One small thing that brings the entire story home. It's a Tuesday evening. Gerald is in his new house, a real house, with a yard, a front porch, a mailbox with his name on it. The first home he has ever owned in 76 years of life. His 3 daughters pooled their savings and bought it for him. They didn't tell him until the keys were in his hand. He stood on the front porch that day and didn't speak for a long time. But that's not the detail. The detail is in the kitchen. When Gerald walked into the kitchen for the first time, he stopped in the doorway. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring. Because in the middle of the kitchen sat a yellow Formica table, with 4 mismatched chairs. The same table. Catherine had kept it, moved it out of the old apartment years ago without telling him, put it in storage, waited for the right moment. Gerald stood in that doorway for a full minute. Then he pulled out a chair, sat down, ran his hand across the surface, and closed his eyes. Now it's Tuesday, and it's spaghetti night. Baby Loretta, 2 years old, applesauce on her chin, is in a high chair at the yellow table. Gerald is feeding her, 1 spoonful at a time, patient, smiling, humming a gospel song, the same one he hummed while mopping floors at Ridgemont Elementary 30 years ago. Catherine and Ellie are at the table, arguing about something that doesn't matter, laughing between bites. Sophie is sketching on a napkin, a drawing of the table, the chairs, all of them together. The house is loud and warm and messy and perfect. Sophie looks up from her napkin. "Dad, do you still carry that old wallet?" Gerald reaches into his back pocket, pulls it out, brown, soft, worn down to nothing. He opens it. First photo, 3 baby faces, creased, faded, 1993. Behind it, a second photo, the 4 of them in the courthouse hallway, arms around each other, the day they became Jeffersons. Behind that, baby Loretta, grinning, applesauce on her chin, just like right now. And tucked into the front sleeve, 3 new IDs, Katherine Jefferson, Eleanor Jefferson, Sophie Jefferson. Gerald closes the wallet, puts it back in his pocket. He looks around the table. The same yellow table, different house, same family. Bigger now. I used to think love was something you had to earn, he says quietly. Took me 48 years and 3 little girls to figure out. Love isn't earned, it's built. One Tuesday at a time. The gospel humming continues. The yellow table holds. 4 generations of a family that was never supposed to exist. Real talk. This one hit different. Like, this man had nothing. Literally nothing. And he still said yes. Bro didn't calculate, didn't negotiate, just signed the paper with shaky hands and $82 in the bank. That's not charity. That's not even kindness. That's just built different. Period. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment and tell me, if you were in Gerald's shoes that night, standing in the rain, looking at that open door, would you have walked in? And if you're not subscribed yet, come on, you know you want to. We'll be here next week with another story that's going to wreck you in the best possible way. See you then.